Hey everybody, unless you've been living under a significantly large rock over the last 72 hours underneath that rock, you've probably noticed a gigantic firestorm of controversy that's erupted within the Catholic Church. It's come to the point where the news story is the number one story trending on Twitter. And you know, if the Catholic Church is ever trending as the number one story on Twitter, it's probably not about the like Knights of Columbus hosting a bake sale or something of that nature. It's a big deal. And the news that's come out regarding Pope Francis's statements in a documentary about same-sex couples in civil unions has kind of left one camp in the church, I think, feeling kind of shocked, sad, angry, confused, fed up, frustrated, fearful. Another camp in the church, I think, kind of feeling, I don't know, elated, just vindicated, defended, understood, relieved, represented. And it seems like this chasm is only getting bigger. And I think what we got to keep in mind, just in historical context, this whole thing blew up, and the very next day was the feast of St. John Paul II, who told us, do not be afraid. In fact, the gospel readings the next morning at Mass were that Jesus came not to be a cause of peace, but rather division. So what's the real story? What did Pope Francis say? What did he actually mean? Today on the show, joining us will be Anna Carter, one of the founders of Eden Invitation, extraordinary ministry within the Catholic Church, reaching out to individuals who experience same-sex attractions with compassionate orthodoxy, showing how this is supposed to be done with love, truth, and charity. Now, before we get rolling, I first want to thank our sponsor, Hallow, the prayer app that makes this whole show kind of possible. I think the crisis going on in the church right now isn't just papal statements or scandals or whatever. It's a crisis of saints. We need more saints. I need to take my prayer life a lot more seriously. You do too. Crises like this and confusion should drive us into a deeper level of interior prayer. The Hallow app kind of helps do that. They've got Liturgy of the Hours on there. They got Scripture. They got so much stuff on there, whether it's the daily Mass. There's so much stuff that you can dive in there. Night prayers, morning prayers, examination of conscience. Get this thing for free. There's a link in the show notes. All you got to do is go to hallow.com/lust is boring, and you can try this thing out for 14 days. I also want to thank our patrons from Patreon who make this show happen. We've got a bunch of people there that make gifts each month that are able to help us afford the video editing, the lighting, the camera, all that stuff. And so if you want to support this message and help us to get it to more and more people, please consider being a patron. You can just give $5 a month, 10, 20, whatever. We'll send you free t-shirts, all kinds of neat stuff. You can just go to the link in the bio to connect with us on Patreon, but it's a huge gift to our family for anyone who wants to support us at a level. Now, let's dive in. I need to make a disclaimer right up from the top. I am with you in all of this, trying to just do my best as the minutes go by to figure out what the heck is going on. And I am basing everything I'm saying on the current information available today on October 23rd. What is it? 4 o'clock in the morning out here in the afternoon out in Arizona. So anything that comes after this, I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. There are some rumors circulating that the Vatican is going to release a statement of clarification. Whether that happens today, in a month, or never, I don't know. But that having been said, what's going on? All the controversy, as you may know, is revolved around a documentary, a biopic about Pope Francis called Francesco. Now, this premiered this Wednesday at the Rome Film Festival. Now, the film producer, the filmmaker who made it, is a Russian-born guy living in America. His name is Eugenie Ofanevsky. Now, he openly does identify as a gay man, and so I think it's good to have that in perspective in terms of what we may be seeing coming out of this documentary. Now, the paragraph in question that set the whole fire ablaze is this one. I'm quoting Pope Francis here. Homosexuals have a right to be a part of the family. They're children of God and have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or be made miserable because of it. What we have to create is a civil union law. That way, they are legally covered. I stood up for that. Now, let's break this down. Break it into little sections, and we'll go through it. First of all, the entire thing is taken out of context. Now, some of you maybe think, oh, Jason, there you go. You're just going to Pope-splain this thing away. No. Hold your horses on this one. This thing is completely cut up. What this was not an interview the filmmaker made with Pope Francis recently. This was actually footage from a documentary, or from an interview a different journalist had with Pope Francis in 2019. That was not fully released to the public, only a little part of it was. What was released to the public was in Spanish. When you translate that, the paragraphs that he was actually talking about at the beginning, they have a right to be a part of the family, those paragraphs are about this long. The sentences that we see in the video come from here, here, and here on those larger paragraphs. In fact, some of the sentences that Francis is quoted as saying in the film are actually out of order from how he actually said them in the original interview. In fact, the second and third sentences are actually backwards in the original text and separated by 98 words that he said of clarification. Now, I tend to be a little sensitive on this whole issue because as a speaker and a writer, I mean, this has happened to me. I remember just last year I was supposed to speak in Ireland, and several of the schools were forced to cancel because there were this firestorm of controversy that Jason's coming and Jason hates gays, and look, he said this, and I'm like, look, I didn't even say that. And yeah, I said that, but read the paragraph before it. It explains it all taken out of context. I was getting comments on Twitter that if I came over to Ireland, they would boil me in a cauldron. Now, thankfully that didn't actually take place, but we got to take a look at this. Okay, a lot of this is taken out of context. Now, it doesn't mean Francis doesn't believe it, but it is being taken out of context. So let's go sentence by sentence. First sentence: homosexuals have a right to be a part of the family. Check. Okay, I mean, I hope nobody disagrees with that. I mean, if you disagree with that, if you think that people who experience same-sex attractions should be shunned by their families and kicked out into the street, well, I don't think you deserve to be a part of a family either. I mean, it's kind of mean, but, hey, grow up, all right? Next one. They're children of God. Check. And have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or be made miserable because of it. Now, honestly, when I first saw that, I was like, well, wait a minute. What does he mean here? They have a right to a family. Does that tie into what he says in the next sentence, that they shouldn't be thrown out from their families? Or is he kind of reversing his stance on gay adoption, that they should be able to have a family? And what does he mean by they should be made miserable because of it? Does that mean they're miserable because they're ostracized from their family, or they're miserable because they can't start their own family? Like, what does he mean? I mean, it's painfully ambiguous, partly because these words are taken out of order in the original document. But what does he mean here? I will presume that what he means is the first. He's talking about people being shunned by their own family. I come to that conclusion, one, through the context. When you read the original Spanish, translated into English, it's very clear he's talking about parent-child relationships where the child is the one who experiences same-sex attraction and has been shunned by the family. The original context is clear. Also, the history of what Pope Francis has said on this topic. Here's what Pope Francis has said on gay adoption. It's pretty straightforward. What happens with gay adoption? He says, children are deprived of their human development, given by a father and a mother and willed by God. Every person needs a male father and a female mother that can help them shape their identity. And adoptions into gay households, he said, is, quote, child abuse. So, I mean, it's pretty strong language where he stands on this. But what gets confusing is that in this biopic documentary, these quotes of him are, I guess, shown also alongside the story of a man who had a gay partner. They adopted 3 kids, and one of them met Pope Francis and said, well, I want to go to church, but I'm afraid we'll get rejected. And he said, well, Pope Francis, look, just go to church. You need to go to church. And he said the Pope didn't give his opinion at all on this man's family. And so it's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, you're saying this, but in the pastoral context, are you delivering the truth? So there's some confusion there, a little bit of ambiguity. Next statement is where most of the controversy has come from. What he says is, what we have to create is a civil union law. That way, they are legally covered. Now, where this appears in the documentary, where this appears in the original interview, we don't know, because the full interview from 2019 has not been fully released. So we don't know, did those sentences come one after the other? Was there a paragraph explaining it leading up to it? We don't know. Some people have jumped on this and said, hey, look, it's a mistranslation. And that's understandable, right? Because in the original Spanish, what he says in the interview is technically not civil union. What he says is convivencia civil. And that means like a civil coexistence. And so technically it's not the same, But people from Argentina, familiar with the situation said, no, these things are interchangeable. The way it's understood, one means the other. Now, my Spanish is no bueno, all right? I took 2 years of Spanish in college. I remember I moved to California after the college, and I got a phone call, and it was a wrong number. It was a guy calling me speaking in Spanish. And I thought, this is my moment, of truth. And it's like, okay, here we go. 2 years of Spanish. And I'm like, your el numero is wrong. The guy just like click. And I'm like, you wasted moment there. But in the Spanish, I'm not the expert, but apparently what everyone's saying down in Argentina is whether it's this Spanish word convivencia civil or civil union in Spanish, they're used interchangeably. So he is talking about civil union here. Now, for a lot of Catholics like myself, this papacy has been a challenge. I'll just be honest. Early on, it's like, who's this guy from Argentina? He loves poor people. This is great and all. And, all we really knew growing up in my generation was JP2 and then the elation of the seminarians in St. Peter's Square when they announced Benedict XVI and B16, the German Shepherd. And, it's all we ever knew. There was just a lot of clarity. There weren't a ton of like kind of off the cuff interviews that left you hanging and wondering, what did he exactly mean by that? And now a lot of us started and something would come out of one of Pope Francis's passing interviews in a different language. And we'd kind of give him a pass. Like, it sounds kind of weird, but I'm sure he meant this, not that. But then as the years went on of just like Pope-splaining, a lot of people just got exhausted of just like, no, like what's going on? I can't explain all of this away forever. And then we had the Pachamama idols going on, last year in the Vatican, and the Vatican just minted a coin of Mother Earth. It's like, what's going on? And then, Pope Francis brings to the world meeting of families Father James Martin, who's not in agreement with the church's teachings on the necessity of chastity for people who experience same-sex attractions. And he's bringing them in to speak at the World Meeting of Families. And then on top of that, Pope's coming back from the Philippines, and I've been there. Wonderful people, beautiful large families. And he says this on an interview to a journalist. He says, some think that, excuse the word, that in order to be good Catholics, we have to be like rabbits. No. And Father, as a husband and a father of 8 children, honestly, that one kind of stung. It felt like tone deaf, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's technically true. You don't have to breed like rabbits to be a good Catholic, but just the language. Look, a rabbit, just a little nature lesson here. A female rabbit has a gestation period of 28 to 31 days. That's how long it takes them to get pregnant and have the bunnies. Now, because they're induced ovulators, their ovulation will return within minutes of giving birth. And the litter of little bunnies can start having bunnies themselves in a matter of months. And so one female bunny can generate more than 50,000 bunnies in a span of 2 years. And so that's where the phrase comes from. But to compare Catholics with big families to this, I just kind of stung. And then more things would come out. It was in 2016, the Holy Father actually used a male pronoun to refer to a woman who identified as a man and married another woman. And he actually doubled down and clarified his use of the word his and said, quote, he that was her but is he. And then just this past August, he actually referred to men who transitioned to women as girls. And what's just painful about this is what he said in Laudato Si, his letter on this encyclical on the environment. There's so much solid stuff in there when he's talking about gender theory, and he talks about the ecology that we need to respect, not only of the world, but even in our own bodies as male and female, of respecting what God has created in us. He talked about gender theory, in some of his writings, about being ideological colonization, where Western cultures, with these, the gender theory, imposing that on civilizations who don't practice or believe these things. And so what's difficult is that it seems that in a lot of the writings, there's clarity and adherence to church teaching, but then when it comes to the pastoral application in individual situations, there seems to be a bit of a disjoint. And the feeling of a lot of the faithful right now is like, Holy Father, just pick a lane. Just please be clear. I remember speaking at a high school once where the religion teachers tell me the challenge here, he said, we get the principle is that he said, some people are orthodox. They're just straight in line with church teaching. And he said that other people are kind of what he calls heterodox. They totally disagree with the church. And he said the challenge we have with the principle here is he wants to be kind of omnidox, right? He wants to be to some people straight and narrow Catholic, and then on the other people wants to appeal to them as well. And the feeling is just like, okay, well, just pick a lane. And I think for a lot of Catholics right now, it's like, okay, well, did he really mean this? Is what he's saying? Yes, the Holy Father meant that he believes that there should be civil unions for same-sex couples. Now, we know this because he says also in this documentary, I stood up for that. And what is he referring to? Well, in 2010, when Argentina decided to legalize safe-sex marriage, he had recommended to bishops that perhaps, civil unions can be a bit of a compromise without allowing same-sex marriage. So the heterosexuals can have marriage, and the same-sex couples can have civil unions. Now, Father Antonio Spadaro, this guy's a director of a Jesuit magazine and one of the Pope's most trusted communication advisors, said this. In the Pope's statement, he said, there's nothing new because it's part of that interview, adding that it seems strange that you don't remember. What is he talking about? Like, this is nothing new that we don't remember. Well, this 2019 interview, when it was released, did talk about there should be part of a family, but this whole part of the civil unions was cut out, and that was never released to the public. And so that's why we don't remember it. This was never released. It was completely clipped out. Now, the prefect of the Vatican's communication office is a man named Paolo Ruffini, and he saw the documentary and he praised it. So what is the Pope doing here? Like, is the Pope kind of endorsing some homosexual quasi-marriage? This is the Pope's position on this. When it comes to marriage, the Pope in his writings has been very clear. Quote, marriage is between a man and a woman. The family is threatened by growing efforts on the part of some to redefine the very institution of marriage, and that efforts to redefine marriage threaten to disfigure God's plan for creation. So he is not proposing same-sex marriage. What he's proposing is a civil union. Now, what is that? This term we hear thrown around a lot, but to be honest with you, like I got lots of friends who are single. I got lots of friends who are married. Like, I have no friends who are civilly united, right? I mean, you don't see cars driving on the road and they kind of got shoe polish written on the back window, just civilly united, honk for us. It's like, okay, what is this thing? We're just not familiar with it. What basic definition of a civil union is this. At least here in the States, it's a legally recognized arrangement similar to marriage, created primarily as a means to provide recognition in law for same-sex couples. Civil unions grant most or all of the rights of marriage except the title itself. Now, an Archbishop Fernandez down in Argentina just put on Facebook that before Pope Francis became Pope, he said then Cardinal Bergoglio always recognized that without calling it marriage, in fact, there are very close unions between people of the same sex, which do not in themselves imply sexual relations, but a very intense and stable alliance. Now, when I read that, my first inclination was like, wait, what? So there's a same-sex couple, but it doesn't really imply sexual relations. It's a very intense and stable alliance. My first reaction is like, yeah, right. Like a boyfriend and girlfriend living together doesn't necessarily imply they're sexually active just because they're cohabiting as boyfriend and girlfriend. It's like, well, look, cohabitation and chastity don't exactly go together like peanut butter and jelly, okay? These things are kind of at odds with each other. So what is he talking about, the Archbishop? I'm thinking what he may be talking about, and again, this is speculation, when the whole gay marriage debate was surfacing here in the States, there's a gentleman by the name of Ryan Anderson. Now, this guy's a brilliant mind in the church. He works for the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank out in D.C., and he and his colleagues had discussed the possibility of a civil union, meaning, okay, two people who basically share domestic responsibilities, regardless of what sex they are or what their relationship is. They could be cousins, they could be roommates, they could be friends, and they're just able to obtain certain legal rights. And I think perhaps this may be what the Archbishop was referring to, that what if there could be some type of situation where you grant legal rights to people who share domestic responsibilities and care about each other, whether they're cousins or whatever, roommates or in a relationship, not in a relationship, because people would say, look, if you don't give them this legal recognition, then they can't make medical decisions on behalf of each other. Life insurance becomes an issue. What about the inheritance? How do we pass on the estate? But here in the States, a civil union is not necessary generally to do those things. They can be accomplished through a simple power of attorney. Now, I don't want to pretend to be a legal expert on international law because I'm simply not. And so how these complexities work out in other cultures, I'm not certain, but I think what's needed right now is for the Pope to clarify, Holy Father, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean here? What is it you're truly proposing? Because there's been questions in his pontificate, and the dubia has been submitted to Rome, and just crickets, nothing. But I think with the whole world erupting right now, we need clarification more than anything. Exactly what is he proposing here? And some will say, well, I mean, what's the problem? Can't this be one way to approach this? That, you can protect marriage. You can kind of have heterosexual marriage here, and then this whole new category that's like marriage, but kind of different. The problem with that was kind of explained by, in 2003, the Catholic Church, through what's called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. This took place 2003, so it was under the papacy of St. John Paul II. Now, the prefect for the congregation at that time was Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, then eventually Benedict XVI. They released a document, and here's the title of this. I've put a link to this in the show notes so you can read it. I've also put a link in the show notes of the translation of what Francis said, of as much as we have in the entirety, so you can see where that's taken out of context. But one of the links in the show notes is this. The document is called, take a deep breath. I'm actually going to take a drink of water before I read the title. Here we go. Considerations regarding proposals to give legal recognitions to unions between homosexual persons. I know what you're thinking. That's a really catchy title. You want to put a hashtag on that one. But I want to read to you just a little bit of this, because this outlines why the church teaches what she teaches regarding not legally recognizing homosexual unions, even if it's not in a sacramental way. And so I'll just take 3-4 minutes and read this and unpack the church's reasoning behind this. In the Creator's plan, sexual complementarity and fruitfulness belong to the very nature of marriage. Now, it's not saying by that if you're married, you must necessarily be able to have kids. Now, we know many couples that struggle with infertility. It just means that those acts are ordered toward procreation. But ultimately, the Holy Spirit is the Lord and giver of life. There are absolutely no grounds for considering homosexual unions to be in any way similar or even remotely analogous to God's plan for marriage and family. Marriage is holy, while homosexual acts go against the natural law. Homosexual acts close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine affective and sexual complementarity. Under no circumstances can they be approved. Now, Pope Francis, I think is going to say, if he says anything, that we're not endorsing same-sex acts. But the problem is, as this document goes on, it says this: moral conscience requires that in every occasion, Christians give witness to the whole moral truth, which is contradicted by both approval of homosexual acts and unjust discrimination against homosexual persons. Therefore, discreet and prudent actions can be effective. These might involve unmasking the way in which such tolerance might be exploited or used in the service of ideology. I want to read that again to you. What happens sometimes is that tolerance is exploited in the service of ideology. So they're selling you tolerance, but basically delivering you an ideology. It goes on, stating clearly the immoral nature of these unions, reminding the government of the need to contain the phenomenon within certain limits so as to safeguard public morality, and above all, to avoid exposing young people to erroneous ideas about sexuality and marriage that would deprive them of their necessary defenses and contribute to the spread of the phenomenon. Those who would move from tolerance to the legitimization of specific rights for cohabiting homosexual persons need to be reminded that the approval or legalization of evil is something far different than the toleration of evil. Laws in favor of homosexual unions are contrary to right reason because they confer legal guarantees analogous to those granted to marriage, to unions between persons of the same sex. Civil laws are structuring principles of man's life in society, for good or ill. They play a very important and sometimes decisive role in influencing patterns of thought and behavior. Lifestyles and the underlying presuppositions these express not only externally shape the life of society, but also tend to modify the younger generation's perception and evaluation of forms of behavior. Legal recognition of homosexual unions would obscure certain basic moral values and cause a devaluation of the institution of marriage. Children will be deprived of the experience of either fatherhood or motherhood. Allowing children to be adopted by persons living in such unions would actually mean doing violence to these children, in the sense that their condition of dependency would be used to place them in an environment that is not conducive to their full human development. This is gravely immoral. The principles of respect and non-discrimination cannot be invoked to support legal recognition of homosexual unions. Differentiating between persons or refusing social recognition of benefits is unacceptable only when it is contrary to justice. Now listen to this. The denial of the social and legal status of marriage to forms of cohabitation that are not and cannot be marital is not opposed to justice. On the contrary, justice requires it. All Catholics are obliged to oppose the legal recognition of homosexual unions. The Church teaches that respect for homosexual persons cannot lead in any way to approval of homosexual behavior or the legal recognition of homosexual unions. The common good requires that laws recognize, promote, and protect marriage as the basis of the family, the primary unit of society. Legal recognition of homosexual unions or placing them on the same level as marriage would mean not only the approval of deviant behavior with the consequences of making it a model in present-day society, but it would also obscure basic values which belong to the common inheritance of humanity. The Church cannot fail to defend these values for the good of men and women and for the good of society itself. Now, that's clear language. It's blunt. Some people might get offended by it, but this is the Church's teachings on this topic officially. And I think when it comes to the whole same-sex marriage thing, I think oftentimes we overlook 85% of countries in the world do not legally recognize same-sex marriage. It's about, I think, 29 countries right now, but there's about 195 countries in the world. So 85% do not recognize the legality of same-sex marriage. Some do so because they're predominantly Christian cultures, contrary to the value. Other cultures are violently opposed to individuals who experience same-sex attractions. Massive human rights violations and violence being done to them. So globally, we can't impose an American ideology on the world and assume they're all like us. When this whole thing lands, a lot of the people in those countries are realizing the Holy Father seems to be setting a precedent here. Because if people are still not in favor of this, people will say, well, are you more Catholic than the Pope over there? Because, I mean, he just said this, didn't he? But when it comes to civil unions, so many issues come up. Because, okay, well, is this, they get legal recognition, all the benefits of marriage? Well, is that only for same-sex couples? I mean, well, what about cohabiting boyfriend-girlfriend? I mean, can they have it without getting married? Can they have all the benefits of marriage? Or what if we're just abstinent roommates? I mean, some of those benefits of marriage, can we legally get those too? You can see it can get pretty dicey, confusing. And so the whole point of why the state typically reserves for marriage certain legal rights is to incentivize and guard marriage as the fundamental cell of society. Because the union of man and woman is what creates human life, and that's the best environment in which these young people thrive. Now, where do we go from here? Like, okay, is the Pope not infallible now? Well, first off, the Pope's statement was not done in the context of infallibility. Just to define infallibility, Canon Law 749 says this: by virtue of his office, the Supreme Pontiff possesses infallibility in teaching, when is the supreme pastor and teacher of all the Christian faithful, who strengthens his brothers and sisters in the faith, he proclaims by definitive act that a doctrine of faith or morals is to be held. So infallibility does not mean that he's impeccable, he never sins. It doesn't mean that everything he ever says is correct. It simply means that when it comes time for him to officially proclaim something for all the faithful to believe on an issue of faith and morals, the Holy Spirit preserves him from teaching error in that context. It does not include passing remarks from an Argentinian interview in a biopic shown at a film festival in Italy, okay? And so this has been very made clear by different bishops and cardinals around the world in the last 48 hours. Cardinal Raymond Burke, always a light and a beacon, he said this: the context and occasion of such declarations make them devoid of any magisterial weight. They are rightly interpreted as simple private opinions of the person who made them. Bishop Athanasius Schnieder has come out saying the same. Cardinal Gerhard Mueller. Many bishops are coming out and saying, hey, this is not official church teaching. These are the opinions of a private theologian. And now, as we've seen today, even those are taken out of context. And so we hope and we pray for clarity that it would come forth from the Vatican. Could the Pope be wrong on this thing? Well, it wouldn't be the first time, right, that a Pope's been wrong. I mean, we see in the New Testament, Paul rebuked Peter to his face in the book of Galatians. He was clearly wrong, by withholding himself from table fellowship with the Gentiles. We have St. Catherine of Siena telling the Pope, you need to get your tail back to Rome instead of living in your little palatial estate you got there in Avignon, France. And the Pope tucked his tail and went back and listened to St. Catherine because he was clearly in the wrong. And so I know this all puts us in a really weird place right now. What did the Pope teach? What is going on? Is the whole world going to hell in a handbasket? I mean, we had the Australian wildfires, and now we had COVID, and then we had the first presidential debate, and then, everything. Peace be with you. Jesus Christ said, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives, that I give to you. This is his church. Who is it? Pope John Paul II, or John the 23rd, when he would go to bed at night, would look out his window, bedroom window, to the whole world and Rome and the church, and just say, God, it's your church. I'm going to bed. And I think we, in a sense, need a healthy detachment of God. It's your church. This is your bride, and you're never going to abandon us. Could it get dicey? Could it get more confusing? Could more statements come out that are in contradiction to church teaching? Yeah. But you know what? The stability of the church is founded upon the promise of Jesus Christ, not the perfection of its human leaders, who are all sinners from the start. We all fall short of the glory of God. God is continuing to hold his bride, the church, in his hands, and he is going to see us through this thing. John Paul II, his great feast day was yesterday, just told us, be not afraid, because we can trust in Jesus Christ. And so what do we do with all this stuff? To give us context is the guest that we are so blessed to have on the show today. I have been admiring her work for a long time. Her courage. Anna Carter has started an apostolate in the Catholic Church called Eden Invitation. Whenever I meet young people experiencing same-sex attractions, and they're thinking, well, doesn't God just want me to live a life of misery and loneliness and repression and self-denial? I'm like, dude, you got to go to Eden Invitation. You got to plug into these ladies. You got to watch their videos. You got to read their stuff. God, following Jesus Christ does not lead to a life of self-denial and repression. But it's hard to believe that unless you see people themselves who are living it out in their day-to-day lives. And so I want to welcome to the show, Anna. Thank you for coming on to the show, and thank you for your ministry and the gift that you are to the church.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, what a blessing. I know Eden Invitation has been a blessing to so many people. And, before we dive into what Eden Invitation is, what's your take on all this stuff? I mean, where were you sitting when you heard about it? And what's the last 72 hours been for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think you did, a really thorough job of talking about a lot of the ideas, right, that are at stake, and a lot of the ideas that are flying around. And I think where I've been is the human heart, right? Like the reality is, like, the work that I do, like, there's a lot of people. We're in contact every single day with people who this is their experience, right? They're wrestling with sexuality, they're wrestling with gender, and just the aches of the heart that people have. And then I think sometimes even when those like ideas are flying back and forth on social media, and people get really alarmist, it's sometimes easy to take those things personally and think like, hey, do people remember that I'm here? Like you see like your great comments earlier about the need for family, right? Like you see somebody reacting super extremely to like the Pope's remarks. You're like, wait a minute, do you think I don't deserve a family? What kind of church is this, right? Do you think I don't deserve a place, or that I'm a child of God? And so um, I think those are some of the areas too where it's like,
Yeah.
no, we need to recognize that those of us that are in the church with this experience and like sometimes get hit from like the shrapnel of the cultural crossfire, I sometimes
Yeah.
that's how I kind of feel on weeks like this, to be honest.
Yeah. So you're saying that people who leave posts on social medias aren't thinking about other people's feelings sometimes? Yeah, no, I mean, it's true, and even you bring that up, I think just a lot of people don't even think about this. They just think about the one person they're arguing with in some thread from some post on social media, and they're not thinking about the other thousands of people that are reading, like, hey, that's my story. I experienced this, and when, I understand you're upset about the Pope's comments. I mean, there's plenty of awesome bishops and cardinals that are really upset about it for darn good reason. But like you said, the shrapnel is hitting you guys, and this is your home in the church as well as anybody else's. And so I want to dive into some of those things of like, what does this actually mean to pivot in a sense from just the controversy and the smoke of this whole thing to like, okay, well, how can we grow as a church through this whole experience? But before we do, I want to just make sure our listeners have some idea of you, of your story, of how that led you to found Eden Invitation and what that's doing for the church right now.
Yeah. So my journey, I was raised Catholic. I mean, kind of typical like youth, like golden child youth group kid in high school, like went to the student bill conference. I heard you talk, Jason,
Okay.
back in the day. And, but I was going through all of that and really fell in love with the Lord, right? Fell in love with his church. Um, but in the meantime, I mean, you're a teenager, right? I mean, teenagers have feelings, you have hormones, you have things that get stirred up. And um, I started to realize an attraction that I had to other women and didn't really know what to do with it. This was the, late 90s, early 2000s, and this wasn't really being discussed. And if it was like in the context of the sex abuse crisis, right? And imagine being like a 15-year-old kid who's like just trying to figure out your own little confused heart. And all you see are headlines about like homosexuality equals pedophilia, and I say that because that's like my entire generation. Like if you meet a millennial that wrestles with this, like this was when we were coming of age, right? It was in the midst of this real tragedy in our church. And a lot of us, I think, just got kind of shell shocked from that. Like, pardon all my Marshall analogies here. Um, and that kind of like drove us into the shame that I think sometimes you talk about, Jason, of like, no, like we're not supposed to live in this shame. And I think that's where I went, right? That's where I went, was this place of shame. But still like love the Lord and really wanted to follow him. And so, kind of long story short, for me, I ended up kind of on this trajectory of like theology and ministry, and had really awesome places of community where I was able to share about my experiences and be received, right? To get accountability for areas that I was struggling with, to have mentors, spiritual directors who were able to guide me. Um, and but for me, I've always been like a mission minded person. And so one of the disconnects I kind of realized as I moved through a job in ministry was like, this is part of my life. This is part of my testimony. I don't see a lot of testimonies like me out there. Right. I was a high school teacher and I was teaching this topic in a sexual morality unit and realizing like, shoot, like, what do I show them? Like, what do I even use? Like, what resources do I give them? And grateful for what was there, but I was realizing there weren't a lot of stories like me, or there weren't. And so, long story short, the Lord just like led me to this place, along with my co-founder Shannon, to discern like, hey, maybe if there's a gap, maybe we're called to step into it. And really a lot of discernment on, what do we wish we had when we were 19, when we were 20? What do we wish we had now? Why did we stay in the church, right? Why didn't we leave? And it was really out of that conversation and out of friendship, really, out of prayer, out of friendship, out of a call to mission, that Eden invitation came to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your courage in doing it. Because I mean, I can't even count how many people I've sent your way. Because, I mean, honestly, when you enter the mind and the heart of a young person, I mean, God bless the Pope and the cardinals in the church, but their own peers, young people, have more authority on this subject. Like, you have more authority on this subject from the heart of a teenager than any prelate, because you're talking the talk, you're walking the walk. This is your story. It's not just some, rule getting imposed on them. And obviously, from a spiritual standpoint, yes, the church has their authority, but from human experience, the young people need to see people that are living witnesses that chastity is realistic, that chastity, as John Paul II said, is the sure way to happiness. Now, when was the last time you ever saw that in the media for people experiencing same-sex attraction? Like, no, really, chastity is the sure way to happiness. I mean, because it's not out there, they're not seeing it. And so with Pope Francis's statements, I think temptation is going to be right now in the church is to miss any good that's in the statements, because there's a lot of problematic stuff in there, and we need to focus on that. The church needs clarity. The children of the church, the faithful, need their Holy Father to be black and white, and we need to pray for our Holy Father. But I think there could also be a mistake that we could make of thinking, like, it's just all bad and there's nothing to learn from this whole situation. But to me, it's almost like when I was a kid, I'd go to the movies and I'd get a box of, I think it was Whoppers, those candies, and you'd sit there and you'd be eating the movie, but like there's usually like one Whopper in the box that's like just this rotten, nasty inside. I don't know what happened to that thing in like the Whopper factory, but you bite this, you're like, that's no good. But you don't throw away the whole box, right? Yeah, there's something objectively wrong in that one, but there's got to be good other stuff in here. And so I think there's some real good in what Pope Francis is saying here that we don't want to miss out on. And yeah, we need to correct the ambiguity or the falsehood and really deal with that. But let's just pivot a little bit just for the sake of the benefit of the church here. I mean, what he talked about, same-sex individuals who have those attractions needing to be part of a family. That's something he really drove home. And with that in mind, what would you say? I'm just going to give you two scenarios. First one, I'm a teenager. And I'm a teenage girl, 15 years old. I identify as bi, and my parents are like uber Catholic. I mean, super uber Catholic, Shiite Catholics, off
Welcome
the
to my
charts.
life.
Yeah, like way off the charts. How should I tell them? How do I come out to my parents who are uber Catholic without getting shunned and thrown out onto the street and excommunicated by my family and never see them again? I'm scared to death. I want to be honest with them. I want to be transparent. I want a real relationship with my parents, but frankly, I'm scared to death. Maybe they have a clue about this. I don't know. What do I do, Anna?
I think, frankly, I think what a lot of kids will probably do, or I mean, adults, like the reality is I work with plenty of people every day who their parents still don't know, and they're 35,
Yeah.
and so I think a lot of times, practically speaking, I would say throw out some feeler questions. I know that maybe is hard to say initially, but I think just the reality of like how hard it can be to not be received well. Sometimes it can be good to just throw out some feelers like, hey, what did you think about this? Or there's plenty of opportunities in the media, right? To ask your parents and see what they say. What tone do they take? How are they receiving? And that can maybe help you kind of angle, all right, how do I want to share this with them? But I think one of the key things is to, trust in their love for you, and trust that they want what's best for you. They might not articulate that the way, they might not know how to even articulate that exactly in way. Like sometimes there can be disconnects all the time, right, between us and our parents, and the ways that we word things or phrase things. But just trust in their heart that they love you, and just tell them you need a little time to share something with them. And I would definitely recommend sharing it a little bit as story, like saying, hey, can I tell you something I've been experiencing and a little bit of the story behind it, right? And I don't want you to say anything until I'm done. Can you do that for me? Because I think sometimes parents, they care so much. Like if you're a parent watching this, like you're like, whoa, I want to say something. Oh, I want to speak, and just to put that egg timer on for 15 minutes and just let it be, and just to be able to share, this is what I'm experiencing. This is when I started experiencing that. This is where I'm confused. This is where I need you, right? To be able to share some of those things. Those would be some quick thoughts.
Yeah, and I noticed the language that you're using there. You're not so much saying that she should come to the parents saying, hey, mom, dad, I'm gay, I'm bi, I'm this, I'm that. It's more of thinking like, hey, these are the experiences that I've been having. These are the feelings that I've been going through. Do you think there's a benefit in taking that experiential approach rather than the declaration of identity?
Well, I think it can be valuable because I think those words mean different things to different people. The way people use them, how they use them, what they mean by it. Your parents are probably going to have one perception of what you mean that might be different than you, 15-year-old, what you mean. And so sometimes I find that it might be helpful to I would say it's probably most helpful to just share what's going on in your life, right? Kind of eliminate some of those barriers to dialogue.
Yeah. And maybe to those young people, because I mean, some of the parents may just not receive it well at all, and it could be like a mess. But God willing, we can kind of trust the process, so to speak. I mean, hopefully it'll turn out better than the Philadelphia 76ers and trust in their process. But what I mean by that is like this parental child role is something that will hopefully mature into adulthood. And this might be a rocky conversation. I mean, it might be a mess, and it might really hurt because I think people experience same-sex attractions already have to wrestle with, does God accept me? Does the church accept me? Do I even accept myself? I've had enough rejection, even of myself by myself, that I don't need my parental rejection. So I'd rather live with them only knowing half of who I am, rather than tell them everything and then just get kicked to the curb emotionally, so to speak. But maybe if we look at it as like more of a long term of just like, hey, give the parents the ability to have whatever natural reaction they're going to get, even if it's not the best reaction, let them work through that. Okay. It might take a month, might take a year. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think after the dust settles, what could emerge is a more authentic relationship where, okay, like this is out in the open. Yeah, it was difficult. It was painful, but hey, let's realize that this isn't the only thing about me, right? I mean, I'm your child, and there's a billion things about me. This happens to be one, and and to try to trust that process. And, and with time, God willing, their hearts can be more merciful and be reminded that at the end of the day, you're not gay, you're not bi, you're not straight, like you're my child. That's who your deepest identity is, in a child of God. Now, from the other perspective, though, how about this one? I'm a Catholic parent, and my kid just came out to me. What do I do?
Yeah, well, I think that last point you made, Jason, is really good, because I think we run the risk, if we hyperreact, if we overreact, if we fixate, we actually run the risk of talking out of both sides of our mouth, right? Because on the one hand, we're like, wait, this isn't your identity, but all of a sudden, like, I'm actually going to put this hyper focus on this thing and treat you differently because of it. Like, well, wait a minute, like, what's going on with that? And so, yeah, I would say, like, first of all, listen, right? Listen to what they are saying. You can, ask some clarifying questions. I'm all, maybe in the moment, maybe read the kid's body language. Maybe they're super stressed out, about it, but to say, okay, like, to listen to what they have to say, affirm your love for them, right? If we're talking about family, right? I think the reality is that, like, we all need to receive, like, the loving gaze of our Heavenly Father. And that is mediated in such a powerful way through our parents, right? It really is. And so to be able as a parent to reaffirm, like, that, thank you for sharing this with me. I realize this is a lot to entrust me with, right? How many kids hide vulnerable stuff from their parents? So many, but the fact that your kid wants to tell you this, that's huge, right? That's a sign of relationship on the part of your child. And so to affirm your love for them, thank them for sharing this vulnerable part of their life. And to be frank, I actually wouldn't get into a big conversation right then and there. Like, Jason, like you were saying, you have kind of the long game here. You have this, like, whole, your kid's gonna go to bed upstairs and you're gonna see him in the morning. And so I would ask, actually, maybe for a little time, to say, thank you so much for sharing this. I would love to just, like, think and, like, just pray about what you've shared a little more. And, like, can we talk about this again in a week? Or give yourself some time to maybe to moderate that out, right? Because I think, like you were saying, Jason, there's going to be emotions, right? Mm-hmm. And so moderate that out, like, look up some good resources, and come back and have that conversation, because you are going to want to know, like, a little bit more of, like, okay, kid, like, what are you thinking about doing with this? And I would also even ask, like, do you know, like, find out, like, do they know what the church teaches on it? Not just what not to do, right? But do they know that, like, this invitation to chastity, do they know that this doesn't impact how you see their dignity, how the church sees their dignity, right? And making sure to kind of clarify those doctrinal points as needed, because you're, again, the primary catechist, but don't feel the need to do that in conversation one. Give yourself some time, do a little research, continue the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point. I heard the quote once that rules without a relationship creates rebellion. And that's true between God and man. It's true between parents and children. And so, the whole approach of Eden Invitation is really compassionate orthodoxy. And I think those words are also put in proper order, and they need to be united. If you have truth without charity, or charity without truth, you're not giving people what they deserve. And so to lead in with that charity. So if you're going to have them walk away from that first conversation, you want to make sure they walk away feeling heard, feeling listened to. Not like, okay, well, I'm glad you told me. Let me tell you why that's unethical. It's like, okay, we can work that. We got to accompany them in the truth, so that we're not like, okay, well, hey, you be you. It's like, okay, well, you need affirmation, you need love, but then part of love is telling people the truth and giving them the truth that, hey, chastity is what you're called to, and then when the time comes right, show them something. Things I'd recommend personally is like Desire of the Everlasting Hills or The Third Way. These are movies that have been created, and I'll put a link to them down in the show notes after the show. You can just go to chastity.com/SSA, same-sex attraction, and there you'll see some of your videos, some of Shannon's. We've got Desire of the Everlasting Hills. Show these videos, because they're not from my perspective. They're from the perspective of people experiencing the attractions and why they've chosen to embrace chastity and how they've realized the church is their home. And so for those, that are in the church, what do you find are some of just the aches, the pains of the people in this area when it comes to just sexuality and gender? Like, where's the aches in their life right now that I think, and then we'll get into like what the church can do to help them in those aches. But what would you say are some of the things they're aching for right now?
think one of the key aches maybe sounds obvious once you say it, but I think one of the big things is relationship, right?
Yeah.
This ache for intimacy, an ache to be known, to be loved, to be received, and to know that people aren't going anywhere. I think especially for young adults or for teens, um, all of your friends are like our whole lives are before us and we're figuring everything out, you know and then you're kind of faced with what can seem like a heavy yoke of obedience, right? I mean, yes, there's like such beauty and goodness in a life of chastity, but there are particularities if this is your experience and you're like exclusively real, like deep-seatedly like attracted to the same sex. Like there's a heavy yoke of obedience, right? And so to be able to like find your Simons, and to be able to know like who is it that is walking with me like regularly and accompanying me in this space, who's for me, right? And like where are we going? Like where am I going? I think the need too for like joyful hope, like about your future, that like God loves you, that God has a plan for you, and that you are fearfully and wonderfully made with gifts and with charisms and ways that you can offer like your love and your goodness to the church and the world, that you can give in like spiritual maternity and spiritual maternity and spiritual paternity that the world needs. Like, and in fact, like maybe your current situation, like God's allowed that for you, and there's going to be a way that he's calling you to be a saint, and he is in the midst of it.
Yeah. And sometimes the place you least think that he is, the place that you're losing him, this is where my relationship with God is going to rupture, that could actually be the place where he's calling you to the deepest sanctity, and, I want to put a shout out to the guys who are listening, who are young, maybe high school, college, whatever, to not withhold your friendship from other guys who experience same-sex attractions because you are too afraid and protective of your own social status that you withhold masculine friendship from these guys. You do them grave injustice by doing this because you're like, well, hey, if I associate with that guy, then everybody gets going to think I'm gay too, and so I'm not even going to talk to that guy. Grow up and get over it and go be friends with this guy, because not only does he deserve your friendship, you deserve his as well. And so individuals who experience same-sex attractions, I encourage them, like, please do not deprive the church of the gifts that God has given to you that you're going to offer this church. One day we're going to have canonized saints who experience same-sex attractions. I'll bet you we already do have canonized saints that had experienced same-sex attractions, but maybe it just wasn't culturally something that could be brought up, but it was something that they experienced at some point in their life. Like, we don't know. God knows, but there's no way that he's going to like bar them from the kingdom of heaven. Well, you felt that feeling, you're out of here. No, but there's going to come a day where they're going to be raised to the altars of people who truly glorified God in their bodies and pursued chastity. But in the meantime, those saints need to be made, and they need to be made in the here and now. And it's going to be a lot harder for them to understand God's love for them if you guys out there are distancing yourself from them as if they're second-class citizens in the church. And so don't do this. Don't do it at school. Don't do it on social media. Make friends with these. And you're not compromising your Catholic faith by being friends with them. You are compromising your Catholic faith by refusing friendship with them. And so I just had to get that off my chest because I knew growing up, I was that guy, right? I went to an all boys high school. It was like, you're gay. I'm not gay. You're gay. You're gay. A bunch of idiots, And so I just think it's so important that guys hear that. So what do you think the church can do? Like, what do you think they need from the church within the parishes, within the youth groups? Like, what are concrete things the church can do to minister to them, to accompany them with truth and love?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think one thing too, a few things. I think one is naming that this is in the pews. I think so often because there's so much at stake in broader culture, right? That it can be really easy. Like the vast majority of times I've heard this mentioned in a homily, if ever, but I have. It's usually about something going on outside the church walls, right? Yeah. And so if you're a young person, you can start to think that if this is your story, then you just belong outside the church walls. No one knows you're here.
You're invisible.
And so to recognize, I mean, something as simple as like, I mean, if you're a youth minister watching this and you're like giving a normal keynote talk about all the things people wrestle with in life, just put this one on the list.
Yeah.
Add it to the list. Like it'll take you an extra 2 seconds. And
Yeah.
I guarantee you are going to have youth in that room that are like pierced to the heart because you saw them. Right. And it takes 2 seconds. So I think that would be one, just like mention it more.
Yeah.
Um, I think another thing too is to educate yourselves, to there again, like Jason's putting resources in the show notes, like know what's out there, know what's out there for pastoral care. The truth is, I think as we're continuing to move forward in this world of ours, if we don't already all know someone personally, we will before we pass on from this life.
Yeah.
There's going to be someone in our lives. And so to read up on this stuff, to have a sense of it, right? Because if we're all, as church, we're all family, right? If we're all the family of God together, like this is your brother, this is your sister, maybe literally, biologically, your brother, your sister, but if not that, then spiritually. And so to know that, to know some of these stories, to know some of these resources, to be able to recommend, right? And I think a third thing I would say, I heard this in a talk once, so I'm kind of copping it, but it was it was a Protestant psychologist who was telling this story of how this call to chastity for all of us in a variety of ways, like is a costly obedience, right? Like Jason, you have 8 kids. I mean, your obedience to chastity into your family, I'm sure has cost you a lot of sleep over the years. It's cost you a lot of stress, right? There's costly obedience in every state of life. But this sense that like your costly obedience is my costly obedience, right? How can we share in each other's burdens? And he gave an example of a story of a friend of his who was single for the Lord, largely because of this experience. This woman was in her 40s, single for the Lord. And he said to her, like, how can I be there for you? Like kind of this, he's like, oh yeah, costly obedience. I'm going to do it. He said, how can I be there for you? What can I do? And she said, invite me on your family vacations. She didn't have a family to go on vacation with, right? And so that sense of like your costly obedience is my costly obedience. If you have someone in your life who's striving for the gospel in this way, ask them how you can be there for them, right? To discern that together. And I hope they're discerning that for you too. Like a lot of my best friends are married now, and Aunt Anna in the house, like there's more I'm able to do to like be present with their family and than I could maybe in a different state of life. And so that we can discern that together, right? And I think if people in the church can see that we're here for each other in really concrete ways of love, there's less temptation to leave for the secular community, right? Because you're actually experiencing it in real time in the church.
Yeah. I remember reading recently, someone said that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is human connection. And that goes with a lot of things, not just addiction, but I mean, we need that human connection. And that's why I love what you guys are doing, because I mean, you guys got the book studies, you got the retreats, you've got the resources, all that stuff. And you've taken on a costly obedience. I mean, you have said, God, what is it you're calling me to do? And I'm going to dive right in. But I think, God blesses us. Good measure, packed down, shaken together. He pours into your lap. And I know that that's happened recently, for Eden Invitation. You've had some exciting news where you won the OSV challenge. Explain, what that is to the listeners and what that is going to do for your apostolate moving forward.
Oh yeah. So it was huge news for us. I mean, we're pretty young. We're only a few years old. And so, donations always help, right? But we won this innovation grant that was through Our Sunday Visitor and this group of Catholic creatives. And it was for these kind of up and coming ideas in the Catholic Church. And there was three different winners among the finalists. And so for us, we're really excited to move forward because we've had a lot of our ministries based online. So, people reach out to us via email, and we connect via Zoom. And we were doing Zoom before it was cool, 3 years ago. But our initiative is called Hearth and Porch. So over the next year, we really want to establish these communities, really, we're calling them hearth groups, in different regions throughout the country where people can have that community, have that friendship, have that formation together in person. A lot of what we do is online. So to establish those hearth groups, and then for June, which in the secular space is Pride Month, to film and release some more testimonial videos, right? Because I think that witness is so important, right? That witness is so important to be able to see. I mean, especially for young people, right? To be able to see yourself in in someone else, right? I think is so critical. So that's what we're hoping to do, like over the next year, and the grant is going to help us get there.
Yeah, and what I love about you guys is, like, in my opinion, you guys are the real bridge builders, right? I mean, that's a phrase that's so used. Oh, we gotta build bridges. It's even in the Pope's tweet on the movie poster of Francesco of how important it is to build bridges and not walls. I mean, Father James Martin's book, Building Bridges. But like, if you're giving people charity and accompaniment, but you're not giving them the truth of God's plan for human love and sexuality and chastity, I always say that is not a bridge, it's a dock. It's half of the structure and it's incomplete, and you're not going to get them across the water. But what you guys are doing is you're leading them all the way home into the heart of the church, which is Jesus Christ. Into the confessional, into the tabernacle where God wants to draw all of us into. And so I cannot thank you enough. I have put a link in the show notes to Eden Invitation, where you can learn about them. You can watch their videos. You can, I assume, donate to the ministry there through the website. Share this with family members. Part of the whole thing is it's just the ministry is moving beyond the whole LGBT paradigm, that there's more to the human person than just initials. This isn't who we are at our deepest core. We're children of God. And man, they are on the front lines of the Catholic Church. So pray for them. Pray for our Holy Father. Today is Friday. You should be doing some form of penance today to unite yourself with the Passion of Christ. If you haven't had dinner yet, fast. Have some bread and water for dinner or something. Like, let's do more than complain about the problems in the church. Let's reach out to make sure these people know that even if they've been cast out by their earthly families, the family of God and the church will take them in. We'll love them. And so let's pray for families where this is a situation. Let's pray for the people that are scared to death to hear their parents, and the parents are scared to death to hear the news. Let's just cover this whole thing in prayer, knowing that the church belongs to Jesus Christ, and she is going to see us through absolutely to the end. And the one thing that God does not want us to do is to lose our peace. We can have anger. We can have righteous anger. We can feel these emotions that we're feeling, but underneath it all, Christ's peace is something that has been given to us. And so in the show notes, check out Eden Invitation. If you want to donate to our ministry, you can go to Patreon. The link is there as well. And we have a new project going on now. If we just get 5 people to become patrons in the next couple days, we are going to take our Pure Faith app and we're going to no longer make it for sale. We're just going to make it for free for anybody who wants that prayer app, because how bad the church needs some prayers, but it helps to have some funds, because how much we got to pay to keep the app and all that stuff. So if we just get 5 people to become patrons the next couple days, we're just going to make that for free. So if you want to make the app free for the entire world, become a patron. We'll send you some free swag as well. And then likewise, in the show notes, we've got links to that long thing I read from the CDF. We've got the statements from Burke, from Bishop Athanasius Schnieder. All that stuff is there, as well as the link to the app Hollow, which you can try for 14 days, which is awesome as well. So, Anna, I cannot thank you enough for being on. God bless you, and just thank you so much for being the gift of the church that you guys are. Listeners, please pray for them, because they are setting this place on fire. Awesome.
Thanks, Jason.
So much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.